Pedophile at the doctor's office. When I was 4 years old in the late 80s, my mother was pregnant with my little sister, my older sister who was 10 at the time, and I went with my mom to one of her prenatal doctor's appointments. In the office, I grew restless, so my mom told my sister to take me out to the van and wait for her to finish up her exam. When we walked out of the doors to go to the van, there was a man standing there. He was right outside of the doors, facing the parking lot, but he turned to look at us as we exited. He was tall, at least to me, overweight, had bright red hair, and he was wearing a denim pair of overalls. He was swinging his arms back and forth, and each time his hands would clap behind his back, he would clap them together, then they would swing forward and clap in front of him. Swing, clap, swing, clap, swing, clap, over and over and over again. I remember feeling very frightened of him immediately, and so did my sister. As we were walking past him, he said at us, "Look at those little girls. I like little girls." I was only 4 years old, but I knew something was wrong about the way he said that. My sister grabbed my hand and whispered, "Don't look at him." As we walked, he began to walk after us at a slow pace, still swinging and clapping. It was almost as if he was fine with us walking away from him, because the farther away from the building, the more privacy that he had. We hurried for our van and got inside. My sister told me to lie down in the floor behind the middle seat, so I did, and she locked all of the doors and lay down beside me. He got to the van right after she lay down. We could see him looking through all the windows and hear him jiggling the door handles and saying, "Where are you, little girls?" In a way, you could hear a creepy smile in his voice. We lay there in fear, just waiting. Finally, it all stopped. I don't know if someone came out of the doctor's office and interrupted him or not, but suddenly everything was quiet. We were afraid he was still out there, so we kept lying there until my mom came out. I don't know if this man was insane or mentally challenged or just evil, but I do think that he would have molested us had he been able to get to us. The Nice Man. This happened when I was 7 or 8 years old. Me and my younger sister were waiting in the doctor's office for our parents. They both had appointments and told us to wait in the lounge and not move anywhere. My parents were very strict with us from a young age, so we obeyed, and didn't even play with the toys they had set out for younger children. Anyhow, a couple minutes after my parents went into their appointment, a young guy walked in. He didn't go to the desk, so he may have been just waiting for someone. The man noticed me and my sister and smiled at us, and sat next to me. Now, even as young as I was, I knew the rules. Don't talk to strangers, 'cause you simply never know. However, the rules usually applied only to creepy old men and women, and the man looked like he was in his early 20s, near my eldest brother's age, so me and my sister did not freak out near him. He looked normal, smiled normally, and talked just like anyone else. We didn't feel creeped out at all. I'd been reading a Barbie book when he came in, and he started talking to me and my sister about Barbies. We were amazed. We never thought grown-ups could play with Barbies too. He told us he had lots of different clothes for them, and all the cool new Barbies had just come out. My sister and I were impressed. Soon, he started trying to get more personal in the conversations, asking my sister's and mine's ages and names. At this point, warning bells should have been ringing, but everyone seemed to think he was a cousin or relative from how we were talking to him, so they didn't do much but watch him babysit us. So we told him all of our information. Besides, he knew about Barbies. He seemed cool to us. After a while, he told us a secret. He had lots of Barbies in his car and wanted us to see them. He said if we were good and came with him, he'll even give us some Barbies. At first, me and my sister were unsure. Our parents had told us not to move, but the man seemed okay and wasn't making us scared or anything like that. So, after him telling us to follow him a few more times with a promise of new toys, we finally agreed and got up to follow him to his car. However, there must have been some good out there that day, 'cause just before he could lead us out, my parents arrived. both done with their appointments. They instantly assessed the situation and were furious. They grabbed us roughly and walked straight out the door. I tried to tell them that he was only going to give us Barbies, but they would not listen, and my sister and I started crying. The man, for some crazy reason, tried to follow, saying we were all just gonna play a game and there was no reason to freak out. My dad exploded on him. We were never taken to that exact doctor's office again, so we never saw the man again as well. Though sometimes I do wonder what would have happened if my parents hadn't come out when they did. Creepy dad at doctor's office. About 2.5 years ago, I had my son at 16. I was still really a kid and I usually look younger for my age unless I wore makeup, which I never did even till now. This being my first child, I was extremely overprotective, but my mom insisted for me to ease it a little bit and try not to be so overprotective. Anyways, it was my son's first year checkup and he had just started walking, and the clinic I was in was rather small, and they had given my son an injection that was mandatory. As I was waiting in a waiting area for his prescriptions, he began getting fussy and wanted to walk and play with the little loopy rings on a table. I was very aware of my surroundings, and I noticed an older-looking man with his 2 children. The only reason I knew they were his is because they kept calling him Dad. But the weird thing is that he would have his hand on his son's upper thigh and constantly rubbing it. The kid was around 8, and he wasn't at all weirded out by this, and seemed like it was normal. From eavesdropping, I learned he only saw his kids on certain days, and this day, he had them and was getting them checkups. Not important, but the other kid was about 10, and she too didn't seem put off by his rubbing his younger brother's thigh. I don't know why I never said anything about this to anyone. So, this guy had a band-aid on his finger, and he was showing it to younger children like, hey, look at my finger, I got hurt, but it doesn't pain me and you should touch it, it's funny. Red fucking flag. My son was casually walking around this little room, and I wouldn't have let him since I was very overprotective, but my mom knows best, and I thought, hey, we're at the doctor's, I guess it's fine to let him walk around for a bit, right? Wrong. My son passes by him slowly, and the guy does the hey, look at my finger thing. I go and grab him, and I did not feel comfortable. As I pick him up and start to walk away from this creep half stands up from his seat and grabs his hand as he'd had this overwhelming temptation to touch him, and this was his last chance. I turn around and full of anger, tell him to never friggin' touch my son again. It was loud, everyone saw and heard, and I guess they weren't expecting it from someone like me. I felt it was right, and I knew some people were agreeing silently. Before this, he was playing with a little girl who was sitting on her mother's lap and making her laugh, and the mom looked incredibly uncomfortable, but looked as if she didn't want to be rude and didn't say anything other than motioning her daughter to try and play with her phone instead of this creep's weird bandaged finger. After I said that, our prescriptions were ready, and we left right afterwards. Mind you, the room at that moment was completely silent. His kid just had a what the fuck just happened face. But anyways, creepy dad, let's not ever meet again. Creepy doctor. This happened to me some years ago. I've never known what to say about it, and I've only ever told one person what happened, and then not the specifics. I'm still not sure whether I misinterpreted the situation or not, but I was really creeped out by this encounter, and I still am. I'm female, and at this time of the story, I was 22 years old. I was in grad school, and I'd occasionally go to see quite wonderful male nurse, Steve, at the campus health center for prescriptions and checkups and whatnot. Over the course of my first semester, I found I'd stopped having my period for some discernible reason, Pregnancy was not a possibility, seeing as I am gay. Stephen ran some tests, found abnormal hormone levels, and was concerned I had an endocrine problem. He gave me a referral to see a specialist at a nearby medical center. Unfortunately, when I tried to make the appointment, I learned the specialist he'd referred me to was booked up for the next 4 months. The woman I spoke to suggested I see a different specialist in the department. "He's very good," she said. So, I agreed. I showed up for the appointment, and when I said who I was coming to see, she said those same words. "He's very good." I enter the office. The specialist is a very elderly man. I remember feeling faint surprise that he's still working at his age. I tell him what's going on. I haven't had a period in over a year, etc. He says he needs to examine me. Fine. He has me stand. He pulls my jeans and panties away from my waist a little, looks down, and asked if I'd always had hair there. This is when I start to feel uncomfortable. I just try to justify to myself I have an hormone imbalance, so it doesn't seem like an unreasonable question, right? But there's something about the way he said it that I didn't like. He has me pull my shirt up about halfway and puts his hands on either side of my waist, patting up and down, up and down. I did not like it at all. After that, he asked me a few more personal questions about my medical history, orders some tests, and then I leave. I'm supposed to see him again in a few months. I already don't want to. Afterwards, I tried to talk myself out of feeling creeped out. I kept telling myself he was a professional. Everyone said he was very good. My fear was completely unfounded, etc., etc., etc. At the same time, in the intervening months, I find myself Googling his name to see if anything comes up. I don't really know what I'm looking for. I find nothing except that he's a very highly regarded expert on endocrine disorders. The feeling doesn't go away. And then he calls me to follow up. He talks about test results, inconclusive, reminds me of the next appointment, and then he says this. "I didn't examine your breasts last time, so we'll need to do a breast checkup and take care of that." This is paraphrased, but I remember hearing what sounded like eagerness enter into his voice. When the call ended, I decided I was done. I was never going into that office again. I wished I just waited for an appointment with the other specialist, the one Steve had known and actually referred me to. I didn't do anything about this upcoming appointment right away. I think I hoped it would somehow go away on its own. I'm confused about the timeline of all of this, but I had other phone calls from him. He tended to call early in the morning, sometimes while I was asleep. I remember getting a voicemail that was something like, Emily, where are you, Emily?" I remember being really irritated about the volume of calls. I'm sure it was under 10, but it seemed excessive for a doctor I'd only seen once. Finally, I just called his office and canceled the appointment. The receptionist asked repeatedly if I would like to reschedule, and I told her repeatedly that I just wanted to cancel. Even afterwards, I questioned what had happened a lot. As I've said, I'm gay, and I'm also shy, particularly with men. So I kept going back and forth on whether the creep factor was real or whether I was just being weird about the situation because he was a man. The thing that gets me, though, is that I really liked the male on-campus nurse. We got along really well and I trusted him completely, so gender alone was not the issue. It wasn't age either. Steve was definitely over 50. There are also other little things. A roommate of mine mentioned how her male doctor was required to keep the door cracked and or have a female nurse present during physical examinations. That certainly was not the case with the doctor I had seen. I've barely breathed a word of this incident to anyone. I told half of it to my best friend months later, but even then, I couldn't bring myself to talk about the details. I didn't tell her anything about what he said on the phone. In some ways, I feel like it's just a ridiculous story that's all in my head, but the creep feelings has never gone away.